In the beginning, Hindus believed Ganga flowed in the heavens, but she was held captive by the creator god Brahma. Then Brahma decided to send the river Ganga down to earth.
But there is one problem, that Ganga has got such mighty force, and if she comes on the earth will drown.
So the god Shiva blocked Ganga's fall, gathering her waters in the locks of his hair.
So Shiva just opened one lock of his hair and the Ganga flew. She's the mother because she gives birth to everything.
This holy river came from the river in heaven that we call the Milky Way.
They say that Milky Way actually is a reflection that you see in those waters which are still beyond.
Scientists have dated the universe to about 14 billion years, best we can figure. Hindus have it at what?
Hindus do not believe in one creation. They say that these are cycles of creation.
Okay.
And the primordial creation could be something like 8.6 billion years ago. Actually, this whole creation myth is very difficult to comprehend, because we say that gods like Brahma has created the universe, but then they ask a question, who created Brahma?
Right.
And then
It's always a question then. Creation happened and then the gods happened.
So our next step on the journey from 3.75 million years, we go to physics.org, a mainstream site, and this is of the ghost DNA found in some West African people that spans back to approximately 800,000 years. Now this is worth a read. A team of researchers at the University of California has found evidence of ghost DNA in some modern West African people. In the paper published in the journal Science Advances, the group discovers their study of genetic samples collected from the Yoruba and Mende groups and what they found. Prior research has shown that approximately 800,000 years ago, two groups of hominins diverged from a common ancestor. They have become known as the Denisovans and the Neanderthals. In this new effort, the researchers have found evidence that suggests a prior group split off from the same common ancestor 200,000 years earlier. That's a million years ancient alternative view. The researchers were studying the lineages of the Yoruba of southwestern Nigeria and the Mende people of Sierra Leone. The researchers found some non-modern human DNA in samples. That led them to compare the non-human segments to Denisovans and Neanderthal DNA. When they found no match, the researchers were forced to conclude that the DNA was from a common ancestor that diverged over 1 million years ago. Since no fossils on the other ancestor have ever been found, the researchers dubbed their genetic remnants as ghost DNA. Further study of the gene snippets showed that they were introduced into modern human genome approximately 24,000 years ago. We'll get to there. The researchers also found that the percentage of the ghost DNA in the Yoruba and Mende people ranged from 2 to 19%. That's strange, because you and I carry at least 5% of Neanderthal DNA. Find that strange. And those genes were of a type that would have been involved in suppressing tumours and regulating hormones. Well, due to the percentages found in modern humans, it appears likely they spread very quickly, which indicates widespread interbreeding with West African people for a short time. The team also found evidence of the same DNA in a few of the Han Chinese descendants living in Beijing and some Westerners living in the US. Does this mean that we were migrating across the world at that point in time, ladies and gentlemen? The researchers plan to continue their study of the ghost genes, hoping to learn more about their role in the genome and why they persisted so well in West African people for such a long period of time. Moving swiftly forward, ancient alternative view, from 1 million years, we go to Science Daily, yet another mainstream site that shows DNA evidence for the Neanderthal, and it gives a timeline for the new modern human related dispersal out of Africa. Well, I find this article absolutely intriguing. It says ancient mitochondrial DNA from the femur of an archaic European hominin is helping to resolve the complicated relationship between modern humans and Neanderthals. The genetic data recovered by the team led by scientists Max Planck for the Institute of the Science of Human History and the University of Tübingen provides a timeline for proposed hominin migration out of Africa that occurred after the ancestors of Neanderthals arrived in Europe by a lineage more closely related to modern humans. These hominins interbred with Neanderthals already present in Europe, leaving their mark on the Neanderthals' mitochondrial DNA. This pushes back the possible date of the event to 470,000 years ago. Now, our timeline is going back a hell of a long way, ladies and gentlemen of the ancient alternative view. Let's have a little bit of a look at what else they found. Prior research analysing nuclear DNA from Neanderthals and modern humans estimated the split of the two groups approximately 765,000 years ago. However, studies looking at the DNA showed a much more recent split of around 400,000 years ago. Moreover, the mitochondrial DNA of Neanderthals is more similar to that of modern humans, thus indicates a more common ancestor. Well, we've looked at that on a prior episode, and you and I carry a minimum of 2 to 5% Neanderthal DNA. So we are related as so-called modern humans to the Denisovans and the Neanderthal. The femur of the Neanderthal excavated from the Hollensteins Adel cave in southwestern Germany provided such an opportunity. The bone, which shows evidence of being gnawed on by a large carnivore, provided mitochondrial genetic data that showed it belongs to the Neanderthal branch, explains Cosimo Pozith of the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History. Wow, absolutely phenomenal, ladies and gentlemen. The proposed scenario is that after the divergence of the Neanderthals and modern human mitochondrial DNA dated to a maximum of 470,000 years ago, a group of hominins moved from Africa to Europe, introducing their mitochondrial DNA to the Neanderthal population. Thus, this intermediate migration out of Africa would have occurred between 470,000 years ago. Despite the large interval, these dates provide a temporal window for possible hominin connectivity and interaction across the two continents. The influx of hominins would have been small enough that it did not result in a large impact on the Neanderthals' nuclear DNA. However, it would have been large enough to completely replace the existing mitochondrial lineage of Neanderthals, more similar to the Denisovans. Now, where on earth could we go from here? Who did the Denisovans and the Neanderthal come into contact with, and who did they spawn? Ancient alternative view. Let's have a look at the next part of our time. And stepping forward now, yet again using DNA evidence, which is a refutable source of evidence, ancient alternative view. We look at New Scientist and an article that reads Game of Bones, First Europeans Shifting Fortunes Found in DNA. Well, a proud lineage with a history stretching back thousands of years is swept aside by newcomers from the southeast, only to rise to dominance once more 15,000 years later. It's not the plot line of some fantasy epic, but the real story of prehistoric Europe in the years after modern humans conquered the continent. A new genetic analysis, yes, genetic analysis, has just revealed we know that modern humans first arrived in Europe around 45,000 years ago, when the continent was still a Neanderthal stronghold. Over the next 30,000 years, archaeological work has revealed a procession of different cultures, each associated with different artifacts and lifestyles. At this point, ladies and gentlemen of the ancient alternative view, I'd like to point you to my Gravitian videos and also the disappearance of the Aurignacian for 15,000 years. Where did they go? Archaeologists tend to think these sort of cultural shifts reflect the spread of new ideas through an unchanging population. But a new analysis of DNA taken from 51 ancient Eurasians tells a different story. They actually reflected the spread of different peoples. The Aurignacian, who we've mentioned, this culture was dominant between 45,000 and 35,000 years ago, before they disappeared, may I add. The culture produced fine bone and stone tools and some of Europe's oldest and most beautiful art. Doesn't sound like a culture that was really struggling, does it now, ancient alternative view? By about 33,000 years ago, a new culture that began in southeast Europe was beginning to spread across the continent, the Gravitian, and one of my most studied ancient civilizations. Now, between the two, the Neanderthal must have mated with the Aurignacian to produce the Gravitian at that time. Were they mixing DNA to try and find the best to cope with conditions for cataclysms? The late, great Sir John Anthony West said, until proven otherwise, the golden era of 33,000 years ago must be looked at, and I tend to agree with him that this is the time when humans were literally making history. They are famous for big game hunting, mammoths, bison, and yes, we see the hallmark. We can look at it on my Pinterest, Ancient Alternative View, on my Twitter, Ancient_View, where we look at hallmarks to the nth degree with our team. And we look at the cultures going back to the Blombus Caves, the Neanderthal, at 70,000 years, to where the hashtag lozenge started. Later, at the height of the Ice Age, around 19,000 years ago, yet another culture swept across West and Central Europe. This Magdalenian culture is famous for the reindeer hunts and for their artwork caved into bones and antlers. One of the oldest individuals examined by David Reich at Harvard Medical School in Boston and his colleagues is represented by a thigh bone found at a site called Goyet Cave in Belgium. radiocarbon dating shows it is 35,000 years old, meaning that the Goya individual is associated with the Aurignacian and early Gravettian. Reich and his colleagues also looked at DNA from 14 Gravettians across Central and Southern Europe. They turned out to belong to a branch of the European family tree that is entirely different from the Goya individual. In other words, the Aurignacians were pushed aside by the expanding wave of Gravettians. I like to look at it another way. Were the Gravettians preparing for what was going to be the cataclysm of 11,700 years ago? We simply didn't have time to come up with everything then, and we've looked at the timeline today coming all the way forward to 33,000 years ago. Could everything have been done at 33,000 years? Like the Sir John Anthony West, the late great, says that it was. Maybe it was earlier. We need to look at this ancient alternative view. It is exciting and striking how a relatively homogeneous population sweeps across large parts of Europe between 33,000 and 26,000 years ago, displacing the populations that were known before. But that's not the full story. The genetic analysis also looks at 6 Magdalenians that are descendants of the displaced Aurignacians. At this point, their DNA was not here. This is a real surprise, says team member Cosimo Pozith and Max Planck Institute for Science of Human History in Jena. It shows that the Aurignacian lineage didn't disappear when the Gravettians swept across Europe. In fact, from the end of the last glacial, 19,000 years ago, its genetic component reappears in Spain. From then to around 14,000 years ago, this nuclear signal spread in Europe again. I find this fascinating, ladies and gentlemen of the ancient alternative view. We've gone from 3.75 million years ago to 14,000 years ago. Let's see where our journey takes us. So we come towards the end of our timeline, where I'm going to leave you all at Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago with an interesting question. The world's first temple, well, looking at the evidence of prehistoric civilizations that could well have gone back to 3.75 million years, and we've looked at civilizations that go back that far. Was Göbekli Tepe the beginning, or was it the end of our timeline before the Ice Age? Pre-Ice Age cultures and their hallmarks need to be looked at in extent, and here at the Ancient Alternative View, that is what we're going to do. I urge you to look at my Gravettian video and my Aurignacian disappearance video and bring yourself up to speed. The hallmarks and physical evidence and DNA are irrefutable evidence that us as a civilization did not start after the cataclysm. We were before that. I look forward to hearing your views, Ancient Alternative View. All the very best.